Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. Welcome to another edition of the Maulana Sulaiman Ravat Show here on Hilaal TV. Now, our viewers would know we cover a variety of topics on the program, from the spiritual topics, the straight out dini or religious topics. We discuss social issues, and we also discuss quite often on the program political issues. But we always try and keep it relevant to your life in some way or the other. And if it's not directly relevant, it will be of interest. So the topic that we chose for today, it's something that I have an interest on, or in rather, but I can't profess to have too much knowledge of. Naturally, in the kind of work that we do, we have to deal with these kinds of issues that are related to the topic that we are taking up for discussion on the program today. But by no way am I in no way am I an expert, but I have an interest in it. In many ways, I even have a fascination in it. It's a topic that has a very legal connotation to it. And when people hear it, sometimes it almost kind of has a bit of a negative connotation to it because of the consequences of what flows from these processes. But it should not be that. The way I understand it and the way I think it, it's a very pivotal thing. It helps to regulate, it helps to avoid and prevent problems, inshallah, before they arise. And when problems do arise, because life is like that, you cannot eradicate problems altogether. It puts in place processes and procedures and principles that helps you to navigate. And from what I understand, in terms of the broad principles of this particular topic, there's a lot of what's within it that's rooted in the principles and in the values of our deen. So what am I talking about? We're talking about HR. Now, in major companies, you'll have an entire department dedicated to human resource. You'll have an entire team. You'll have a head. In small organizations, perhaps not so. In smaller companies or businesses, perhaps the operational head, deals with HR himself or herself. But what is this? As a concept, as a phenomenon, where does it originate? What are some of the key points that we need to understand? That is what we are going to be taking up with our guest on the program today. And we cross over to Durban, and we are joined on the line by Brother Naseem Kathrada. Brother Naseem, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the program.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Maulana, how are you?
Alhamdulillah. I'll leave it to you as an introduction to perhaps tell our viewers a little bit more about your background and what is it you do and your very specific focus on HR.
Okay, Jazakallah. Just firstly, I think your summary of what HR is really good and shows that you actually know a lot more than you profess to know. So it's everything that you said and a lot more. But a little bit about myself, Naseem Kathrada. I've studied in industrial psychology and I've got an MBA. I started off purely in HR. I was the HR director or a manager for a large company at my first job. Alhamdulillah. I then progressed to, it's very much in our blood to be entrepreneurs. So I went into my own business, the family business we joined. So I've had experience in retail, in manufacturing, in the education sector, and even in an NGO sector, in two different positions there as well. But no matter what my position was, I always say that entrepreneurship flows in my blood, but my heart beats with human resources or human capital, as we tend to call it. Currently, I am the HR or Human Capital Director for the Region Business School, and that is the capacity that I hold for the last year or so. So that's just a bit about my background.
I see you using the word human capital as the terminology evolved somewhat.
It has, and I know, if given the chance, I think we'll talk about the evolution of HR, and I'll explain that to you in a little while if that's okay. But that's very much the trending terminology for the department, Jay.
So before we get to the evolution and to the history of HR, right? Just in simple man's or in layman's terms, what is HR? I'm just trying to think for the ordinary person. When you say HR, the kind of things or images or words that will, it automatically spring to mind: contracts, hiring, firing, disciplinary hearings, disciplinary processes, that kind of stuff. How would you define it? What would you say HR is?
Okay. So for me personally, and I think this is the trend, the main function of the human resources department is what we call employee engagement. In other words, the function of HR is to make sure that every employee in the organization is fully engaged, body, heart, mind, and loving the work that they're doing. You're providing them with an environment that does. Now, to do that, obviously, there's a whole host of things, and I think we will talk a bit later also about the various functions of HR and how that evolves. So I've designed what I call the HR pyramid, and we'll show you a bit later. The pinnacle of that HR pyramid is employee engagement. And there's a number of functions, starting out with foundational things like you said, the legal aspects of contracts, are we compliant, and so on. But there's so much more to it. It's about making sure that we firstly source the right people, we bring the right people in. So we're looking at the right pool of people, we bring the right people into the organization, we make them feel welcome, we make them understand what is required of them. We then spend a lot of time trying to develop them against obviously the background of what the laws require us to do. And being mindful at all times that every individual wants to grow. So providing them with the opportunity to see that there's growth in an organization, for me, that is the core of it. The legal side of HR and that are just frameworks that we use to guide the process, because not everything runs smoothly and we need some kind of rules and regulations that we do. But really that for me is foundational. The real work of HR is what I call employee engagement. How do we get people excited about coming to work on a day-to-day basis?
Fantastic, and I think that is exactly what I was hoping that we can communicate to our viewers this evening, that they're going to look at it beyond just those legalities and technicalities. So let's move on to then the evolution and the history of HR.
Okay, so human resources or the work environment, obviously, there's always been people working. So HR as such probably only started around the time of the Industrial Revolution. Prior to that, people worked. Initially it was, whether it was a slave working as a slave master type of relationship. The Industrial Revolution then brought about a number of changes, like centralized working locations, so people were working together. But it was still very much a master-servant type of relationship, although not in a slave type of situation. As people began to then start organizing themselves a little bit, understanding that we're working together, there was what we call the trade union era started to slowly start to develop. And their focus, not really quite a trade union, but people getting together to safeguard their own interests or the interests of their members. And primarily that was around things like, making sure that there's no child labor, that people don't work excessively long hours, and that there's some kind of improved condition of work. So that's the background to it. I think modern HR evolution, I describe it as an evolution from being compliance officers to what we now call business partners, and I'll come to that a bit later. So the compliance side of it, the first stage was what they call the human relations era. So in around the 1920s, management researchers started to have a closer look at human factors at work and some of the variables that affected people's behavior. And they concluded that in order to have better productivity, management needs to take care of like the human relations side of it, besides the physical conditions at work. That slowly devolved into what they call the human resources era. And it was felt that there was somebody needs to take care, now that we have more people working in an environment, somebody needs to take care of recruiting people, giving them some kind of training and looking after their welfare. That was very much what we call the industrial relations department. And sadly, that is kind of what people still think HR is about. So that focus on bring people in, make sure that they work well, look after them to some extent, but extract the best out of them. That is what we call industrial relations. And if they falter, make sure that when we dismiss them, we don't go to CCMA. That's kind of the myth that I think surrounds HR. As more people join organizations, that function began extending to cover supervisory staff and other staff, and what became commonly known as the personnel department, still very much IR focused. Mm-hmm. What happened then, though, is that people started competing. So if you have a good employee, and this is obviously very prevalent now, other companies were trying to say, but what, that guy works very well, they can headhunt them and that sort of thing. So there was a sense that people need to be treated more than just as physiological beings, but there's a socio-psychological element to people. People feel things, they have issues around work and that. So, and that's really where the evolution of what we call human resource management came about. However, the word manage, also the word human resource, still has a bit of a connotation. So a resource is something that we want to extract the best of, we want to use, sometimes even abuse, to the extent that we extract as much as we can from it. And the latest change in that is, hold on, these staff of ours are so important that they're not just a resource, but they're actually an asset. And so they need to be treated as an asset. We need to look after them. We need to make sure that they have, they are motivated, that they have something that they can grow to. And so as an asset, that's where the term capital comes from. And so human capital is the latest terminology that is being used. And I'm sure it'll evolve into something a bit later. It's the terminology that we use at our organization as well. So that in a very quick nutshell, and I try to keep it as succinct as possible, is the evolution of it. So at the beginning, we were just complying. We were trying to make sure that we follow the rules. Now the HR department or the HC department is very much a partner to the business. And hence we have within the HR department, we have what we call now business partners, who then sit with the various managers and help them through the processes of getting the employees engaged ultimately. I trust that gives you a good overview.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's quite comprehensive. Excuse me. So I think one key point you mentioned there that, it's about looking at your employees as an asset and not what many would perceive HR to be, that it's a mechanism or a tool to extricate or to extract every ounce of energy out of your staff and to keep them on a short leash and to make sure that they toe the line.
Yeah, that's not it's even more relevant nowadays because since COVID, we've had the great resignation issues. We have had people understanding and feeling like, hold on, during COVID, I was able to make a living for myself working on my own. I was able to work from home. So why is my company not allowing me? So people are a lot more willing to consider moving, and understand unemployment in that is very high. But we're seeing that quite regularly. The number of people that are leaving organizations is far greater than it's ever been. We're seeing it in our own organization as well for various reasons. So, making sure that employee value proposition is something that attracts people to your organization and making sure that they stay in your organization has become a fundamental role of HR. And I would imagine that will apply to every organization.
All right, time for a break. When we come back, inshallah, we continue the discussion on HR with Naseem Kathrada. Welcome back. So on the program today, we're talking about HR, and our guest is Naseem Kathrada. He's an expert in this area. In the first segment, we spoke about what HR is, the connotations, the correct and incorrect kind of connotations to the term, and also the history and the evolution of HR. So Naseem, I did mention, I think earlier on in the program, that bigger companies, big organizations would have at least one person dedicated to HR. Some would have an entire department. Smaller entities, it may be incorporated into somebody else's job description. One of the managers or one of the leaders. Take us through the importance of HR in all organizations, in all businesses. Is this something more required in the corporate sector, or even, say, for example, religious organizations, masjids, madrasas, welfare organizations? How does it? How similar is it across the board? And if there are differences, what would those differences be?
I think very, very valid question, and I think so long as you are employing, whether it's one person or 1,000 people, you need to be cognizant of human resources or human capital. In other words, you need to be cognizant of the person that you're dealing with, the staff member. So let's not call it a department or whatever. Even if it's just employing one person, some part of the time or the mental capacity of the owner, the manager, or whatever you want to call them, needs to be dedicated to the particular employee that you have. So even if you've got one person, are we spending time thinking about what is their needs? How can we make sure that they're coming to work fully engaged? Are we considering their growth potential and that sort of thing? So it does apply across the board. Perhaps to answer why HR is important, to maybe add some weight to why I'm saying this. I'm going to quote from two readings that I've had recently, and I don't, maybe not verbatim, but just paraphrasing a little bit. The one that I recall was one of the articles that I read said that HR is about keeping employees safe, healthy, and satisfied. And I quite like that because if people ask you what is HR, it's a nice description of it, if you like. Safe and healthy are compliant issues. You need to make sure that the work environment is safe and the health and safety regulations are there. Healthy, not only from the perspective of physical health, but mental wellness as well, which is a big issue, really trending at the moment. And satisfied is really the loaded one. So people are satisfied if they have a job that is engaging for them, that meets their requirements, that meets their growth potential, that is interesting to them, that is exciting to them, that pays them a decent salary so that they can look after the family and so on and so on. And then if you're looking at HR as that, as part of HR's function, all of those are critically important. Like I said, whether you have one person or you have 1,000 people. I quite like another one that describes the importance of HR. There's a quotation by a gentleman by the name of Jason Lauritsen, I think it is. He has a self-improvement blog, and he suggests that the work of HR is profoundly important for a number of reasons. Number one, the employees themselves depend upon HR to ensure that there's fairness, that there's safety, and that there's opportunity for them. Okay, so employees need to look at and have a sense that they can trust the HR person, the HR department, whatever it is that you have. Managers need HR because they provide a guidance. And I said, we now call it HR partners, and they are very much partners to the managers because they help them through the process. And leaders, on the other hand, rely on HR to facilitate a culture and work experience. So in other words, HR becomes a facilitator for that. And I think just the one point I want to make here is that managers and leaders and even employees need to understand that it's not HR or HC's job to do the discipline and to do the motivation and to encourage people and to provide great opportunities. That is the duty of the leader and the manager. HR is simply there as a facilitator to all of these processes. So going back to your question, is it important for smaller and versus larger organizations? I think equally important. Ironically or sadly, in a smaller organization, you'll often find that the HR function, because we have this perception that is just an administrative function, will be given to somebody who's got some kind of an admin role. They'll say, you know what, can you take off HR, make sure the guys have contracts and the rest of it. Now, prior to joining Regent, I did 5 years of consulting. And one of the biggest challenges we had was when a client would phone and say, you know what, I need you to help me. The staff of mine I'm fed up with him. I need him to go, get him out of my organization. And then you start asking the questions. Does he have a contract? Has there been some kind of disciplinary process? Have you tried to understand why the person is not working well? Have you tried to improve them? Have you given the training and so on and so on and so on? And none of that happens. And the consequence of that is, of course, we could then end up in CCMA. So just as important for a small organization as a big organization. In the bigger organizations, of course, there's a bigger budget. The HR department has lovely technology that it can use. The leaders are very much understanding the need for HR, and in fact, they promote the idea. You'll find more and more senior HR people become very much part of the ExCo team. So it's a lot easier in large organizations because of budget and because they understand the need for it. But in smaller organizations, I'm saying they need to also understand that you don't have a department, but you need somebody spending some time and some thought to what is HR.
Do you find when the HR function is not given the priority that it requires, that this leads to a lot of unnecessary tension, apart from just CCMA and compensation, but within the organization, it kind of impedes on smooth flowing of processes?
No, absolutely. I mean, just this week, I still get some clients calling me and we try and help them as much as possible. It was an organization that was looking to understand why they're not getting the best out of their staff. And one of the gaps we found was that at the ExCo level and even at the senior management level, there's no one person or no committee that is seriously looking at HR. So nobody's really taking care of the needs of the individuals and the kind of things that's going through their head. There's a lack of communication. There's a sense of a very much top-down approach. So I think the short answer to your question is absolutely, yeah, there's lots of problems that can arise because of that change.
Now, one is you've got very small entities. The other is you've got the big entities, like you said, they've got adequate budget. They can provide not only personnel for the HR department, but also the technology and that kind of thing. But then you would get organizations that are somewhere there in between. They've got a fair number of staff, but they've got budget constraints, and they're saying, well, we just can't have one person with the adequate qualifications dedicated to this or a department. What advice would you give to those in such a situation?
Okay. Maybe a bit contentious, but the one advice would be find the budget, firstly, because I believe very strongly in that. But even if you don't have the budget, you need, I was CEO and ran family business for a number of years. Fortunately, I have had the qualifications and the desire and the understanding of HR. So I always fulfilled the role, whether we were running a retail business of 10, 15 stores with about 100 staff. We didn't have a dedicated HR person, but I very much understood the need for that. So I would take that role in that. So again, you need to find somebody in your exco who has that mindset, who is thinking about HR, who thinks about what is the needs of the people and that sort of thing. So that would be probably the advice. At the very least, have somebody who can understand what human capital is about and what can we do to make sure that we're getting employees engaged. And again, if we see HC as that department or that discipline that is looking at employee engagement, it gives us a very different approach and a different philosophy around HR rather than we're just there to try and extract the most out of people. So a mindset change at the very least is what is required.
What would you say are the functional areas of HR?
I think there's a I alluded a bit earlier to this what I call the HR pyramid. Perhaps we can
look at that on the screen.
And I think that kind of explains to people very nicely. So again, we tend to think of, you bring somebody in, we make sure that they work hard, we discipline them, and then we exit them, kind of thing. That is the basic process. But if we see this diagram that I've designed, at the very top is what we call employee engagement, and that is the pinnacle, and that is, like I've said a number of times, what we're trying to aim at. But that cannot happen if the foundation is crumbling. So at the core of the foundation is the contracts. So do we have contracts that are compliant, that allow us to bring the right people? And supporting that would be obviously compliance rules. Are we compliant with health and safety rules, Labor Relations Act, and so on? Do our contracts then mirror the fact that we are paying people a fair wage and we are giving them benefits? And the benefits could be anything from medical aid and pension fund down to little less costly things like an additional day's leave, in a lot of Islamic organizations, an extra day after Eid, and that those little things sometimes can be quite beneficial. But also, are we recruiting from the right pool and we're bringing the right people in? So that's your recruitment and selection on the left of the screen. And then linked to that, of course, once we get the people, are we making them welcome? The next step in this pyramid is, and the key here are the policies and procedures and the disciplinary codes and practices. So those are the guidelines that we use to then help us to organize the organizations. Organizational design refers to things like your organogram. Do we have the right people in the right place? Are we paying people at a certain level? We often come across situations where people are doing similar kind of jobs. One person gets paid double while the other one is paid simply because they're your favorite and that sort of thing. So all of those kind of things, and we underestimate the impact that has, because people talk. Why is he doing the same job as me but earning more, and that kind of thing. So organizational design is absolutely critical, that we know we have the right people, and it leads to some of the things we talk about just now as well. And of course, job description. Do people know what they're being measured against? And if all of that is in place, then we can then look at what I think is a very critical thing that a lot of organizations don't know, and what we call career pathing. And that's a simple exercise. We talk to every employee. What are your 5-year plans? You are currently, let's say you're a secretary at the moment. In 5 years' time, you want to be an office manager, right? Fine. What do we need to do to make sure that in 5 years' time, when an office manager's position becomes available, you are ready to step into that? You're not going to guarantee to get the job. Do you need training? Do you need exposure? Do we need to send you to the other departments so you can understand? Do you need somebody to mentor you? Whatever it is so that's what we call career pathing. Linked to that, of course, is the training. So that's employee development, and then also managing. So if you want to grow in the organization, what is your current performance looking like? Can we improve that? How can we? So all of those kind of things work together. And then before we get to employee engagement, we need to take care of employee wellness. The last 2 years have been very, very difficult. We're seeing more and more in our organization. We have a full-time psychologist that's available to all our staff and all our students, for that matter. They can talk to him at any stage, and he is busy. He has meetings pretty much almost every day, all day with staff and with students. People just wanting to talk and talk about the difficulties that they've had in the past 2 years, which you're all quite familiar with. Then linked to the career pathing, obviously succession planning, and then which is then taking care of the fact that at some stage people are going to leave, and who do we have that is going to fit into that role. So again, linked to that. If we can have all of this, then we got employee engagement. So again, a long answer to your question, but what are the different functions of HR? It's all of this and sometimes even more than that, because each one of this goes into quite a bit of detail as well. Okay.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, I just want to pick up on some of the aspects that Naseem raised there from that diagram and pyramid. Welcome back. So we're talking HR today, and our guest is Naseem Kathrada. He's a specialist in this regard. You know, the one aspect, and you touched on many key aspects, there was the aspect of succession planning. I don't know why it stands out for me, but perhaps because often in Muslim businesses and in Muslim organizations, you tend to get the sense that it becomes a bit of an issue. I know many times sons would come to us as ulama and say, you know, Maulana, I don't know what to do. All my life, my father was saying that he's building this business for us. And the whole succession plan was in place. And at some stage when he was about to retire, he realized he's not prepared for retirement, not financially, but he doesn't have many hobbies. He doesn't have things to do. His whole life revolved around, you know, being involved in this business. And now, you know, the entire plan has kind of been derailed. Or he retired, but now he's not enjoying retirement, and he somehow wants to make a comeback. And obviously, he's the father. There's a respect and all of that goes with it. But at the same time, you know, you've got to run a family business according to business principles if you want it to prosper. Same thing with Muslim organizations, especially religious organizations. There are those who see their jobs within religious organizations not as a job, but as a calling. And they say, I want to make khidmat until the last breath. So if it's decreed for me to die at 100 years, until then I want to be involved in khidmat. Why should I retire? What is this concept of retirement? So succession planning, where are we getting it right, and where are we making mistakes, specifically in the context of Muslim businesses, Muslim organizations?
Yeah, I think it's very much the Achilles heel of a lot of organizations, and not only Muslim organizations. I mean, even large corporates, they tends to be almost a resistance to trying to think about the future. You know, people don't want to necessarily share information because, you know, maybe he's going to do a better job than me and he's going to take over from me and the rest of it, you know. So again, it's as I said a bit earlier, there needs to be some kind of a mindset change. So you know, through my many years of experience in various organizations, what you're saying is unfortunately a sad reality of the way things are run. And we can't say it's across the board. There are obviously good examples of that. We've got a very excellent example in our family where the patriarch decided quite early on, retired at the age of 56 or so, handed over things to his son. But I think what he did very well and what he did right was he made sure that his son started right at the bottom. So the first job that he had, for example, was to paint the factory. When he understood what painting the factory looks like, he then was asked to go onto production floor, work overtime, work in the evenings, work night shift, and do it. So he understood the business from that aspect of things, right? Eventually, he can now run the business because he understands every aspect of the business. I guess the message I'm giving here is that very often when we talk about succession planning, or as we see it, we tend to give our sons, our family members, you know, the cushy jobs, you know, sit in the office and sit around and that kind of thing. Do you really understand the business? Now that's the one potential flaw that exists. The other one that potentially exists is obviously the patriarch not wanting to give up. And my only advice that I've given this to a few people is you need that patriarch needs to see themselves as a mentor rather than the CEO of the business. Because I think the best balance is to take the experience that these patriarchs have, because they built the business, they understand the challenges of it, and try and balance that with the evolution, the kind of IT type of things that are happening, the new way of doing business that the youngster will obviously come through. So the key then is to try and find a balance between those two. how can we use that institutional knowledge, the experience, the wisdom of the older patriarch with the energy, the new ideas, the plans that the person, provided that person understands the business well. So again, it's a difficult one. And we've come across this many times in Islamic organizations, as well as in individual businesses where it's true the patriarch doesn't want to leave. And my suggestion is start being a mentor from as early as possible. Try to mentor and look at it more as a mentorship type of function rather than a boss employee type of function. I don't know if that helps, but that would be my
No, it
advice.
does, yeah. So I think you alluded to this earlier on that, like in any field, they are new or what we would call current contemporary trends. What are the current HR trends?
Okay. So again, it depends on who you ask, because if you do the research, there's so many people have different. But for me, I see about 6 or 7 trends, both from my experience and from what I've been reading. Um, the first one, and I've alluded to some of these already, the first one is around the issue of focusing on total well-being, so total wellness of the staff. Again, remember people have come through COVID, the economy is in trouble, people can't, the cost of living, the cost of fuel, all of these kind of things, the load shedding, all of these kind of things are making people very anxious. And to make sure that there's an impending burnout crisis, how do we make sure that doesn't? So HR is a very, very big function in providing that kind of comfort to staff. So that is one trend I think is going to take a lot of time for the HR departments this year. The second one, again, I alluded to, is this idea of an the employer value proposition. So in other words, what are you as an employer providing for people? Are you, for example, looking at things like blended work, allowing people work from home sometimes? Are we looking at ways that will keep people here, that provide them with the kind of benefits that they're looking for in that? So creating an organization where the purpose matches or certainly matches the purpose of the people that you are attracting to your organization. So people want an organization where they feel a sense of belonging, where they feel a sense that they can grow. So second part is what I would call employer value proposition. The third is what we would call something like replacing or reshaping the workplace learning. So we very often tend to upskill, but the trend now is, are we right skilling? Because with technology going the way it is, and AI is the latest topic, are we now training our staff, and are we upskilling or reskilling our staff to understand what that means? It doesn't mean that the job is going to go. How do we repurpose their functions so that they can now take advantage of the new technologies? Huge aspect for a lot of departments, and certainly for us as well. Coming out of COVID again, and again, I alluded to it a bit earlier, but redefining the remote and hybrid work strategies as people come back to work, and it's now tends to be the norm, but people remember how nice it was to work from home, or because of the fuel costs, we get this request on a daily basis. Can't I work from home? I'm going to be saving myself 2,000 or 3,000 rands a month, which is a significant amount for me. So how do we future-proof the work environment? What kind of environment are we going to go? Blended strategy where people work from home sometimes, and work, which is the strategy that I'm promoting, because I think you need to have people coming into the organization so that you can maintain the culture and get them to understand that kind of thing. But I think you also need to allow people the flexibility to work from home. So blended way, and I want to specify that depends on obviously the individual, the type of job they're doing. So it's not applicable to everybody. The last two roles, for me, the very critical one is upskilling of your managers and leaders. And again, we alluded to this. There's a very common understanding from Gallup that 70% of people leave organizations because of their direct manager. And I think we have and a lot of organizations will agree with this. We have a number of people that get put into managerial positions without necessarily the proper leadership skills. So leading them and making them understand the importance of empathy and motivating staff and employee engagement and that sort of thing is an area that I think we need to. And perhaps the last one, and again, alluded to a bit earlier, because if we now be seeing HR as, and this is very much becoming a trend, is the evolution of what we call the chief human resources officer. So very similar to a chief, the CEO, the CFO, the financial officer, the COO. We're finding more and more companies are now bringing in a CHRO to be part of that inner circle, so that they, at that highest level, we are thinking about staff. So those are the 6 trends that we're picking up and have become very much part of what we're trying to do in our organization as well.
When we look at HR, there seems to be a perception from the side of employers that labor law is heavily skewed in favor of the employee, at least in South Africa. I can't say too much about what the situation may be in other parts of the world. But that's what many employers feel, that they already start on the back foot. And there seems to be this perception beyond the labor law that even the framework of HR is about looking after the well-being of the employee, making sure that the employee is comfortable and safe, etc., etc. And they say, what about the employer? Recently, I heard an employer complain and say, of late there's a lot of focus, as an example, on mental health, and rightfully so. It's something that wasn't spoken about or highlighted enough previously, especially when it came to men. It was this kind of assumed that men don't have mental health issues, that kind of thing. But he was giving a story and said that I've got one employee who just uses mental health as an excuse to get out of any situation. So if the work was not done on time and the line manager sits down and says, give me an explanation because this is unacceptable. Sorry, your tone is impacting on my mental health. I can't continue with this meeting. Sorry, this workload is impacting on my mental health. I can't absorb this workload. So these trends, are they in some way skewing things more in favor of the employee as compared to the employer, albeit inadvertent, or not? What's your take?
I don't think the laws themselves are necessarily skewed towards the employee. The application of the laws can sometimes be that way. And I think, structures like the CCMA and that tend to default on the side of the employee. So in other words, to look more at and I suppose it's a balance of power issue. There's a feeling that the employee has less power, so let's support them a little bit more. And I'm just talking from experience. It may not necessarily be across the board. So I don't think the law per se, but I think the way we apply the law. So the law does allow for, and I think we need to be fair to the employee. The law does allow for the employee to have certain rights, but equally it allows for us to have rights, as employers to have rights. The problem is that we don't follow the procedure. So very often we have a substantive reason to want to discipline somebody, whether it's a warning or a dismissal or whatever, but we haven't followed the procedure. In other words, we haven't followed the due process that is required. We haven't, counseled the person, had a discussion. We don't issue the right type of warnings. So even in the case of somebody who's abusing something like mental wellness, there's a way to deal with that. Can we get a report from a doctor to say that the person has a problem? If he has a problem, are we providing some kind of support? Send them to somebody that they can talk to. If this becomes a habit, we can, and we deal with this kind of situations on a daily basis. I think if we can be calm about it and follow the processes that are there, and then the law provides for the processes, sometimes common sense provides for the process as well, we'll find that there's a bit more equity, if you like, in HR. So there is a perception that it's skewed, and very often it comes across as that, but I don't think the law per se, as with most laws, are necessarily skewed one way or the other. It's the way we apply it that's more of an issue for me.
So in closing, Nassim, what would you think is important for our viewers to take away from this entire discussion and be better informed, of have a bit of a broader, deeper understanding of what HR is all about at the end of the day?
Okay. Look, I'm obviously very passionate about the whole area, and it's kind of been my life's calling, if you like. And so for me, again, it's about a bit of a mind shift if it doesn't already exist. Alhamdulillah, the organization I work with is very much the understanding of it. So firstly, the powers that be, the senior managers, the owner of the business, the heads of the HR departments, or whoever it is that we're talking to, need to understand the focus of HR is about employee engagement. And that's not to say that it's the focus is on the employee, because the benefit of employee engagement is actually for the company. If you have employees that are fully engaged, naturally the bottom line improves as well. So there's a bit of a selfish reason for it, but if we do it carefully, if we understand that these stuff are assets, they are humans firstly, they are assets, they have skills, they have needs, they have desires. And 9 times out of 10, you will find people want to do well. They want to improve. They want to see growth opportunities and the rest of it. If we try and get into their head and understand what is it that makes them tick, that is what HR is there for. Of course, have the rules, have the procedures. If somebody is underperforming or there's any misconduct, follow the processes. Make sure that we do it carefully. that we do it with due respect and with due process. So I think we need to almost have a very balanced approach to HR. But I think, as with anything, if your purpose is correct, and in this case, I'm saying the purpose is to make sure that employees are engaged so that they can give you the best, so that you get the best and you benefit mostly from your organization. That's a better way to look at it than rather than, these guys are just here, let's get what we can get out of them. And when they trouble us, we'll find a way, we'll get somebody to come in and dismiss them, kind of thing for us. So that would be my broad message. Is the message that I share with my staff, and that on a regular basis as well.
Naseem, shukran so much for your time. It's been a fascinating discussion. Barakallah feek.
Jazakallah for the opportunity, Maulana. Take care.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Viewers, until next week, inshallah, fi amanillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.